David had been driving along the dirt trail for most of the afternoon. The forest was quiet, the kind of silence that usually made him relax. He had worked as a ranger long enough to recognize the natural rhythm of birds, insects, and the occasional rustle of deer in the brush. But this silence was different. It was broken suddenly by a sound that made his stomach tighten, a harsh cry, high-pitched and desperate, unlike anything he had heard on patrol in weeks. He slowed the truck, pulled it off to the side, and killed the engine. The cry came again, sharper, echoing from deeper in the trees. He grabbed the wooden stick he always carried, more out of habit than anything else, and started toward the sound. His boots pressed into the damp soil, and every step seemed louder than it should. He knew whatever was happening ahead was bad. The forest itself felt tense. As he moved closer, the noise shifted into a mixture of ragged growls and short, strangled cries. He stopped just before the slope of a shallow ravine and crouched low, peering through the brush. What he saw froze him in place. In the center of the ravine, half hidden by fallen leaves and branches, a massive python had wrapped itself around a lynx. The cat was bigger than most, her body straining against the coils that dug into her ribs. He saw the roundness of her belly, pregnant. Her front legs clawed weakly at the ground, and each breath came in broken bursts. The snake was immense, at least 5 meters long, its thick body shimmering in a dull pattern of green and brown as it flexed its muscles. David's first instinct was disbelief. Pythons weren't supposed to be here, not in these woods, not in this part of the country. He had heard rumors of escaped exotics, but he never thought he would face one himself. Now, watching the life being squeezed out of the lynx, he had no time for questions. The python's head rose slightly, its tongue flicking in and out, tasting the air, as if aware of his presence. He gripped the stick tighter. His heart hammered in his chest, and every sensible thought told him to back away, to call for help, to wait for backup. But the lynx's eyes, wide with terror and pain, locked onto him for a split second. He felt the weight of the moment. If he walked away, she would die. If he stayed, he might not make it out himself. He moved down the slope quickly but carefully, his boots slipping slightly on loose soil. The python shifted, its coils pressing harder, and the lynx let out a guttural, muffled cry. David shouted, more to steel his own nerves than to scare the snake. The sound echoed off the ravine walls, but the python didn't release its grip. He raised the stick high and swung with all his strength. The wood cracked against the python's thick body with a hollow thud. The snake's muscles tightened instantly, as though in defiance. The lynx gasped, her chest compressing further under the sudden strain. The sight twisted David's gut. He pulled back and swung again, this time aiming lower, closer to where the snake's coils crossed the cat's midsection. Another dull crack, another ripple of muscle tightening. The python's head jerked toward him now, its tongue flashing, eyes black and cold. David stumbled back a step, lifting the stick defensively. The lynx's legs kicked weakly, scraping at the dirt. David shouted again and lunged forward, bringing the stick down hard. This time he struck closer to the snake's spine, and the python recoiled slightly, shifting its weight. For the briefest second, he thought he saw the coils loosen. But then they tightened again, and the lynx gave another broken cry. Sweat poured down David's face. He felt the fear deep in his chest, but he pushed it aside. He couldn't stop now. The python had acknowledged him as a threat, and the battle had begun. He raised the stick once more, ready to risk everything for another chance to break the monster's grip. The echo of David's last strike still hung in the ravine when the python's head whipped toward him. Its mouth opened slightly, rows of curved teeth glistening with saliva, tongue flicking furiously. For a second, he thought it might lunge straight at his chest. He steadied his grip on the stick, shifting his weight back on his heels, forcing himself not to turn and run. Behind the thick coils, the lynx's chest rose only in shallow, desperate movements. Time was running out. The python surged forward, its body rippling with brutal strength. David swung the stick downward, catching the thick head just behind the jaws. The impact jarred his arms, the wood almost snapping in his hands. The snake recoiled, its body whipping sideways, striking against the ground with a heavy thud. Leaves and dirt scattered, but in that violent motion the coils only clamped harder, crushing the lynx into the forest floor. David shouted, his voice raw with fear and frustration. He stepped closer, ignoring the rush of adrenaline that screamed at him to stay away. He jabbed the stick at the snake's neck, trying to pry it away, but the wood slid uselessly against the armored scales. The lynx's eyes fluttered closed for a second, and a chill ran down his spine. He couldn't let her go still, not now. The python struck again, head snapping toward his legs. David leapt sideways, the jaws missing him by inches. He stumbled, nearly fell, then steadied himself and swung hard across the broad back of the reptile. Another hollow crack. The python's body writhed, tightening, loosening, then tightening again in uneven pulses. The lynx wheezed, her claws raking weakly against the dirt. David raised the stick high overhead and brought it down with all the force he had. The wood smashed into the coils, making the python thrash violently. Its tail whipped across his shin, knocking him off balance. He hit the ground hard, rolling to avoid the snapping head that lunged at him again. Dust filled his mouth as he gasped for air. He scrambled up to his knees, gripping the stick like a spear, his arms trembling. The lynx gave a broken cry, faint but still alive. That sound cut through David's panic. He lunged forward again, driving the stick down at the snake's head. The python twisted, and the strike glanced off the side of its skull. Not enough. He yanked the stick back, sweat stinging his eyes, lungs burning. He had to keep hitting, had to keep her breathing. The snake's eyes fixed on him, black and cold, unblinking. It coiled tighter for one more squeeze, and the lynx convulsed with the pressure. David felt desperation claw at him. He raised the stick again and slammed it down with every ounce of strength left in his body. This time the crack was different, sharper, direct. The stick struck the python square on the head. The massive reptile jerked violently, its coils spasming. For a heartbeat, David thought it might turn and strike him in fury, but instead it shuddered and began to slide back. The pressure around the lynx's chest eased slightly, her ribs expanding in a shallow gasp. The python uncoiled a fraction, not enough to free her, but enough to show weakness. David backed a step, panting, his arms heavy and aching. The stick in his hands was splintered along the edge, but still whole. He stared at the snake, waiting to see if it would strike again. Instead, the python shifted slowly, muscles flexing with cautious retreat, its head weaving side to side. The lynx lay pinned but breathing, her flanks trembling. David knew it wasn't over. The python was loosening, but the cat was still trapped. He tightened his grip, preparing for whatever came next. One thing was certain, he couldn't stop now. The python's body shifted again, muscles rippling as it slid back. The enormous coils loosened further, leaving the lynx wheezing on the ground. Her chest lifted in shallow, desperate gulps, each breath raspy and uneven. David held his stick ready, half expecting the snake to launch itself at him again. But instead the reptile began to edge toward the brush, its thick body scraping over roots and leaves. It was retreating, slow but deliberate. David didn't follow. His arms shook with exhaustion, his knees weak from the effort of fighting. He could feel his pulse pounding in his ears. The lynx lay stretched out, sides heaving, her belly swollen with the weight of unborn cubs. She was alive, but barely. He took a hesitant step forward, his eyes locked on the python, making sure it didn't turn back. The snake paused at the edge of the trees, lifted its head high, and swayed side to side as if calculating its next move. Then the forest shifted. A low growl rolled through the trees, deep and guttural, followed by the rustle of multiple bodies moving in unison. David froze. From the far side of the ravine, shadows emerged, one by one. Lynxes, larger than the pregnant female, lean and muscular, eyes glowing pale in the fading light. There were at least 4 of them, maybe more in the brush. They spread out in a loose arc, tails flicking, ears pinned flat. The air thickened with tension. David gripped the stick tighter, his throat dry. He had expected wolves maybe, but not this. A whole group of lynxes, their focus drawn by the struggle, the blood scent, and the strange predator in their territory. His mind raced. He didn't know how they would react to him standing so close to their own kind. He forced himself to stay still, lowering his shoulders slightly to appear less of a threat. The python sensed them too. Its body tensed, head weaving as it turned toward the advancing lynxes. A sharp hiss escaped its mouth, a warning, but the cats didn't flinch. One stepped closer, crouching low, muscles taut like springs. Another growled, the sound vibrating through the clearing. They weren't afraid. David's eyes darted to the lynx on the ground. She was barely moving, her ears twitching weakly, her breaths uneven. The others must have recognized her. Their movements weren't random. This was coordinated, a collective pressure against the python. David stayed frozen, knowing any sudden move could shift their focus onto him. He swallowed hard, sweat running cold down his neck. The lead lynx lashed out suddenly, swiping a paw through the leaves near the snake's head. The python struck forward in defense, jaws snapping shut on empty air. Another lynx circled around to the side, tail whipping as it snarled. The group advanced in measured steps, cutting the snake off from its path deeper into the woods. David realized what was happening. They were pushing it away, hurting it out. The python recoiled, body coiling tightly again as if ready to lash out at all of them. David tensed, his stick raised, though he knew it was useless against so many moving parts. He could only watch. The lynxes didn't let up. They hissed, growled, and swiped, their sharp claws tearing at the ground just inches from the snake's scales. The pressure mounted. The python's head darted side to side, tongue flicking rapidly, the movements no longer steady but erratic. With a sudden whip of its body, the python turned and began sliding deeper into the brush. The lynxes followed just enough to make sure it kept moving, snapping their jaws and striking at its tail as it disappeared into the undergrowth. The last ripple of its body vanished into the shadows, leaving the ravine silent again except for the ragged breathing of the pregnant lynx on the ground. David exhaled for the first time in what felt like forever. His arms sagged at his sides, the stick heavy and splintered in his hand. But the relief didn't last. The lynxes that had driven the python away were still there, now turning their attention back toward the fallen female. They circled her slowly, tails twitching, ears angled sharply forward. Their low growls quieted into heavy breaths, their eyes narrowing as they drew close. David's chest tightened. He took a single step back, not daring to come closer. He didn't know what would happen next. The lynxes formed a rough ring around the weakened cat, their bodies blocking her from sight. For a terrifying moment, David wondered if they had come to finish her off instead of saving her. The air hung heavy, every sound amplified. The rustle of leaves under paws, the faint wheeze of the injured lynx, and David's own shallow breaths. He tightened his grip on the stick once again. He had fought the python, but now he faced something just as uncertain. He had no idea if he was about to watch the lynxes protect their own or destroy her. David didn't move. The lynxes circled tighter around the fallen female, their bodies tense, ears angled back. He could feel the pressure of the moment like a weight on his chest. His every instinct screamed to back away, but another part of him refused to abandon her, not after everything. The stick trembled in his hands as he scanned the edges of the ravine. The python's last ripples had disappeared, but he knew it wasn't far. He could still sense the threat lingering, just beyond the line of trees. He forced himself to take a slow step to the side, not closer, but into a position that gave him a clearer view of both the lynxes and the brush. One of the cats broke from the circle long enough to snarl in his direction, a sharp warning. David froze again, lowering his shoulders slightly, trying not to look like an enemy. The cat held his gaze for a long second before turning back toward the injured female. The lynx on the ground wheezed faintly, her sides heaving with shallow breaths. David could see her chest rise and fall, irregular and strained, but still moving. Relief mixed with fear. If she stopped, there would be nothing more he could do. He glanced at the cats again. Their attention was fixed almost entirely on her now, sniffing at her fur, brushing close with their bodies, their tails flicking in sharp movements. He realized they weren't there to kill her. They were checking, recognizing, waiting. A sudden movement from the brush snapped his attention back. A dark shape shifted at the tree-line. David gritted his teeth, lifted the stick, and shouted with all the force left in him. The sound tore through the air, startling birds from the canopy. He stepped forward, slamming the stick against a fallen log, the crack echoing. The shadow retreated, and for a second, he caught the gleam of scales sliding deeper into the undergrowth. The python was still nearby, but it was pulling away. David didn't chase it. He kept his stick raised, backing up a step at a time, until the forest sounds returned, rustling leaves, distant calls of night birds. He drew a long breath and turned his focus back to the lynxes. The group still ringed the female, their movements slower now, less aggressive. One of them lowered its head, pressing its nose gently to her flank. Another stood guard, eyes locked on David, tail lashing. He stayed where he was, sweat soaking through his shirt, the stick splintered and rough in his grip. He didn't dare cross the invisible line that separated him from them. But he also couldn't bring himself to walk away, not yet. He had to see if she would rise, if the fight hadn't been for nothing. Minutes dragged like hours. The female stirred weakly, shifting her head against the dirt. Her ears twitched, and a low, guttural sound escaped her throat. The other lynxes responded instantly, pressing closer, their bodies brushing hers, offering presence if not comfort. David's breath caught. She was alive. Barely, but alive. He exhaled slowly, lowering the stick just slightly. His arms ached. His knees felt ready to buckle, but he held his ground. One wrong move could turn the fragile piece into chaos. He watched as the injured lynx's eyes fluttered open, pupils wide in the dim light. She lifted her head just a fraction, trembling from the effort. The circle of lynxes leaned in closer, their eyes locked on her every movement. David swallowed hard, gripping the stick tighter again. The female's head wavered, her chest heaving, and the others shifted as one, stepping forward in unison. The sound of their paws pressing into the leaves filled the clearing. David's heart hammered. He didn't know if he was about to witness their protection or something far darker. A week passed before David found the courage to return to the ravine. The memory of that night still clung to him. Every hiss, every strike of the python, every uncertain glance from the lynxes. He had replayed it in his head countless times, wondering if he had done enough, if the female had survived, or if the fight had only delayed the inevitable. Now, with the truck rumbling quietly along the same dirt trail, he carried the small field camera he had set up days earlier. The lens had been watching when he could not. He parked at the same turnout, the forest alive again with the chatter of birds and the rustle of small animals. The silence from before had lifted, replaced by the steady rhythm of a healthy ecosystem. He climbed down, boots crunching softly on the gravel, and moved into the woods. The air smelled damp and green after several nights of rain. His heart thudded with each step as he approached the slope leading to the ravine. The place was different now. The leaves had shifted, branches scattered by wind and time. But the memory of the python's coils was burned into his vision. He crouched by the tree where he had set the camera trap, fingers fumbling with the latch. The small device clicked open. He scrolled through the captured images, his breath shallow. The first photos showed nothing but swaying branches, passing birds, and once a deer nosing the ground. Then came a frame that stopped him cold. The injured lynx. Her body was thin, ribs still visible, but she was standing. Her head lifted, eyes alert, formatted but dry. He scrolled further, and his throat tightened. Behind her, tucked close to her belly, were two small cubs. They were tiny, spots scattered across their coats, eyes wide with wonder. Alive. David sat back on his heels, the weight in his chest lifting. He flipped through more frames, each one proof of survival. The mother walked with unsteady grace, the cubs stumbling after her. They moved through the ravine slowly, their small paws pressing into the damp soil. The camera had caught them pausing under the same fallen log where the python once loomed, the cubs sniffing curiously before hurrying back to their mother. Then another sequence appeared. Shadows stretched long as the sun dipped low, and the lens caught movement at the edge of the clearing. Lynxes again, the rest of the group. They stepped into view cautiously, bodies lean and powerful. The mother froze for a moment, cubs pressing close to her legs. But there was no attack, no threat. The group merely lingered, circling at a respectful distance. One of them lowered its head briefly toward the cubs before turning away. The others followed, slipping back into the trees. The mother and her young were left undisturbed. David's throat burned, and he had to wipe his eyes with the back of his hand. The fight, the fear, the risk, it had all been worth it. He set the camera back in place, securing it firmly, not wanting to miss what came next. He stood at the edge of the ravine for a long while, listening to the steady chorus of the forest. The python was gone, driven out by both man and beast. In its place remained life, fragile but determined. He took one last look at the hollow where the lynx had nearly lost everything. Now it was a cradle for her new family. He turned toward the trail, the splintered stick still strapped to his pack, a reminder of how close it had all come. A simple piece of wood, wielded in desperation, had bought enough time for nature to reclaim its balance. As he walked back to the truck, the sky burned orange with the setting sun. He felt the forest breathing again, alive in every direction. And for the first time since that night, he let himself believe that one person, in the right moment, could truly make a difference.